Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Digital Citizen News, where we, as citizens of the information era, keep you up to date on the most crucial pieces of news. I'm your host for today, Matt Henshaw, and today we have two very important guests with us in the studio. Joining us, Robert Weygand was a member of the United States House of Representatives from 1997 until 2001. A Democrat from Rhode Island, he attended the University of Rhode Island, receiving a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Theater, a Bachelor of Science in Civil and Environmental Engineering in 76, and a Master of Arts in Political Science in 2009, and a Master of Public Administration in 2010, all from the University of Rhode Island. Please give a round of applause for our former Representative Weygand.
Thank you. Thank you.
And also joining us today is Gilbert Goodnicht, Jr., an American politician, a Republican member of the United States House of Representatives, first elected in '94 to represent Minnesota's first congressional district, one of 8 of congressional districts in Minnesota. Please welcome, with a round of applause, former Representative Goodnicht.
How has the media's coverage of the political scene evolved from the time you were in the House of Representatives to today?
Well, I think the intensity has changed so much. When I first ran for the state legislature, for example, I think in the city of Rochester we had 3 radio stations, we had 1 television station, we had 1 newspaper. Today, you've seen just an explosion. I think we have like 7 or 8 radio stations now. We have 2 television stations. We still have 1 newspaper, but barely. And you've seen this explosion in terms of social media and everything that people can do with their computers. And so, in some respects, it makes it harder for people in public service to communicate with people because there's so many different channels and venues from which people get information today. It used to be pretty easy to get our story out and to have communications with our constituents because there were a very limited number of channels to communicate.
We've also seen over the last 11 years the emergence of social media in a dramatic way. It really impacts the way any member of Congress, no matter who you are, how you operate. Previously, we would have normally a public relations or communications person in the office. Now you have not only a person, but you have a team of people responding to social media inquiries and responses to sometimes invalid and inappropriate kind of questioning. But you must do that. It's a burden that we all have as part of our job as a member of Congress and the public scene. So it's changed dramatically, and particularly over the last 11 years. Now, to many respects, that's actually good because it's become far more transparent. You and the public and all of us can see what's going on. The difficulty is when it's been taken out of context or when issues are so crafted in such a small, minute way instead of looking at the entire subject, that becomes very difficult with regard to passage of legislation, impression that people may have of the member of Congress or whatever the politician may be. So social media has had a dramatic change, caused a dramatic change in the way members of Congress, governors, lieutenant governors, and other people operate.
Thank you.
Are there any active solutions that you can think of that might help legislation be passed and help legislation and our politicians act better in the terms of social media?
Well, Gil and I were talking about this earlier this morning. Part of it has to do with the platforms by which you have access to media, Facebook, Instagram, and a number of other, Twitter, and a number of other devices and platforms. There needs to be, we both think, that there needs to be some kind of regulation or control over what goes out. You can't have your reputation smeared over something that's erroneous. Mm-hmm. Certainly, people have the right to voice their opinion as the First Amendment to the Constitution, but there needs to be some careful analysis of what goes on. For instance, free speech, and we've talked about this in all of our classrooms, everybody has free speech, but you can't go into a theater and yell fire and cause people to be harmed.
Of course.
That's not free speech. That's endangering the public. So where are we in between that? I'm not really sure, but I certainly think that we all, whether we're students or whether we're seniors, we have to be careful how we use social media, the way we use it, because it's going to have an impact on these students and all of us in the future.
Mm-hmm. So either of you guys could answer this question. A lot of people agree that we're in the worst political age in history, and they're not talking about the politician. It seems both sides, the liberal and conservative, like to throw fits, point fingers, criticize, etc. What do you think needs to change to make current time we live in more tolerant of different beliefs?
Well, I take a slightly different view, although I agree with the general conclusion that these are pretty bitter political times. But if you look at the history not only of this country but world history, the Greeks didn't write history books. And the reason they didn't is they said that history just repeats itself. And you will have these peaks and valleys. You'll have droughts and pestilence, and then you'll have times of good times. I think that's true in politics. And if you look at, for example, in American history, there have been times when we've had, there was a senator by the name of Sumner who was caned almost to death on the floor of the states or the U.S. Senate. So we've had very bitter battles, partisan, over regions, over the North and the South, and over a lot of things over the years. And so I do think we're maybe at a low ebb, but I'm actually pretty optimistic about the future. One of the things, though, that disturbs me is not so much what happens in Congress and the halls of Congress, but in many respects, I think Congress is a reflection of our society. Mm-hmm. And I think as a society, we've become much more crude in the way we deal with each other. We're not as civil to each other in regular life. And so I don't think it's, I think we have to assume that kind of incivility begins to rub off in politics. But there again, if you look at world history, such has been the case throughout history in many countries. And hopefully we're at a low ebb and things, and Americans will demand that things begin to turn.
Excellent. Let's take another question from one of our students.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a senior. I want to know what you feel the impact was of the Mueller summary and if you think that it should go public.
I definitely think it should go public. I think the summary, and I think that all Americans believe that Robert Mueller provided a report that was thorough, but they want to see it. And even the president has said the public should see it. Now, Attorney General Barr may not provide all of that because he may be restricted by rules and regulations and with regard to the special counsel. But personally, I'd like to see it there. I want to see this chapter be over and concluded, and if there's something wrong, then definitely do something about it. But I think we need to move on with our lives, and the members of the House and the Senate need to do the same. Can we ask them a question?
Okay, here
Absolutely.
we go.
What is your
Yeah.
definition of fake news?
Yeah, here.
Let's go. Yeah. So what's fake news?
For me, personally, I feel that like my definition of it is something that, isn't just completely accurate or proven, and it is opinion based and something that, like you said, with like the words that are speculated, like if or could, it's something that do we really know if that's true? Do we really know if that's completely proven? And like something that I saw is like fake news was like the whole like national emergency. Like, was it really a national emergency?
Right.
So that was an example that kind of popped into my head. But I just believe it's something that cannot necessarily be proven. It isn't necessarily facts being reported on.
Okay, you're a reporter now. You're on an NBC affiliate in New York City, and you're out on the scene,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a murder, and someone said, Gil did it. You want to be the first on the scene to report it. What do you do as a reporter?
As a reporter,
Now, given she's going to be on the news on an ABC affiliate, and she's got the same information, she's going to try to jump it. Are you going to jump her? Are you going to try to get ahead of her? Be on the news first? What do you do to report the news?
that's a good
Any
question.
suggestions by
And for
anybody?
me-
Any suggestions? What would you do? Yes.
I think it depends on not necessarily the affiliate, but who your audience is. I'm the editor-in-chief of the campus newspaper, so we write for students by students, and our perspective is a student's perspective. So first you have to be journalistically correct in like what you guys said. Double confirmation is always important.
Double
you can't just
confirmation.
report what you think. You have to report what you know. But I think it's important to make sure that you're correct in your language by saying alleged if we are reporting about a murder, and making sure that nothing that you say is your opinion. I really enjoyed the question about fake news. I think fake news is something that makes you feel something rather than something that informs you of something.
Do you think that occurs now in the media?
Absolutely. I think that
What would you do to
Everything's
change it? Now, ABC affiliate's going to get out there with that story ahead of you, and maybe Gil was the proper suspect, but it may be that he just happened to be in the neighborhood and someone is blaming him.
And I saw the gun on the ground, and I
And they
picked it
picked it
up.
up to throw it away or something like that. and
Well,
his
to turn it in
fingerprints
for
are all
evidence,
over the
of
gun.
course.
It's really difficult in your position because of the marketplace of communications and media is today. You want to be first on the scene because everybody wants to be the breaking story. But you may not break that story just because you want to be safe. You want to make sure that there are two sources of information, independent, valid sources of information. The pressure is really on all of you as communications media people to get it right. And so often there are people that don't get it right. And it doesn't make any difference sometimes. They do it anyways. And they retract it, never or seldom. They just report it with the correct news a day later or a few hours later. Your job is really tough because your marketplace is very competitive. When we grew up, there was local news stations and there was just ABC, CBS, and NBC. Today you have news all over the place, including your iPhone. And you know, it's everywhere. And you have to be on top of it. How do you become on top of it if indeed you only have a little bit of information? Your job is really tough, but so important. I don't want you to be demoralized by all of that.
It's a challenge. I mean, we all live in challenging times. And we had different challenges when we were your age,
Yep.
but these are challenges for you. Bob, I think, raised the issue, and we've talked a lot about social media. How many of you are on social media? Just out of curiosity.
Is there anybody that is not
how
on
much
social
time
media?
How much time do you spend on social media each week? I mean, I get a little report on my iPad now that tells me how many times, how many hours I spent on it. How many hours do you spend on yours?
A week, I don't even know. Like
A day. Let's take a
A
12-hour
day.
day. Out of the 12 hours, the day.
5 hours.
5 hours.
Yeah, it's pathetic.
5 hours.
I have 5, do I hear 6?
Oh, I was
5 is
short.
probably low.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of hard to measure that because for my job, I have to be on social media.
It is hard to measure,
Yeah.
but do you do email?
Yeah, but mostly to reach my target market because I'm area manager of a bar here on campus to reach the customers that I want to reach and the patrons to get them into Reds.
But that's business, that's not,
Yeah,
that's not social.
But I mean, you can still count it. You know what I mean? Like it's still me being on social media, but it's for a different purpose. Like I'm working.
Right.
You know, but then I know a lot of times because of different devices that tell us how much we're using. There's so much knowledge about how social media can affect us. I definitely think that there's a decrease, at least in this generation, of usage of social media and usage of your phone. Like now, if we go out to dinner, we're not going to be on our phones the entire time. We're going to make that effort and that extra thought to connect with people instead.
My wife takes my cell phone away from me when we go out to dinner. Because I'm always there doing something. So you're with me,
Yeah.
you're not with the phone.
I definitely think that we're more conscious about our phone usage than people think we are. So
And you think it's decreasing in terms of the amount of social time that you spend on it. Business time is one thing.
yeah, I definitely think I'm not sure about the younger generations because they grew up with social media so heavily. Like, we're known as the last generation to play outside, you know? So, like, it's like this grade and, like, I guess juniors that really played outside and, like, hung out with friends, you know, and asked your parents, like, have play dates and stuff like that instead of just, like, being babysat by an iPad or by, like, any type of device, you know, when you go out to dinner with your parents. So I think that's why we're so conscious about our social media usage.
What would you say to me if I said that the classrooms at Sacred Heart are going to be technology modified so that no one can receive any information whatsoever when they're in the classroom?
Oh my goodness.
Ooh, panic.
As long as I can do my homework, it doesn't really matter.
No, so you walk out in the corridor, you can do it, but you walk into this classroom, and once you walk in, your Wi-Fi's are off, everything is off, you cannot communicate whatsoever other than with the professors. Would
I
that
just-
be all right?
No.
I think that the classroom uses a lot of technology now.
Let me use the
Yeah.
technology as the instructor.
Yeah.
And you could use it to the limited responsibility, respect with regard to responding to anything that's going on within the classroom. But for and many of my students would be, they're doing work that is totally not part of the classroom activity. How many in a class, you go into a classroom and you do social media stuff that has nothing to do with the class? You're texting someone, you're emailing someone.
Yes.
We all do. I can't think of anybody, but there will come a time, I think, where you'll actually have classrooms that will not allow for any kind of outside Wi-Fi connecting whatsoever, because it's become so overwhelming with regard to what you do every day, and you're not focusing.
You know, there's something kind of rude, okay? If you're in a conversation with somebody or you're having supper with somebody and they're sitting there on social media. I mean, I think that's part of this rude, crude society that we're starting to create, where people are so narcissistic they care more about what Jane is having for lunch than having a conversation with me. And so I do think that's part of, I think this is all part of that same curve that I talked about, that I think we're kind of in a low spot, and it's going to be up to people like you to help pull us out. Patrick has given us the sign that we've got to go, so that's his job.
Pulling us off the stage.
Well, thanks
Thank you.
again.
This has
You
been a
guys have been great.
class.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, again for joining us here with Digital Citizen News. And a big thank you to our guests here today, our former Representative Wagan and former Representative Gudnick. And a big round of applause for our studio audience today. Thanks so much for coming out, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Matt Henshaw from Digital Citizen News at Sacred Heart University.